Hi everyone, welcome back to Radio Night Crime. Before you drift off, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. If you're enjoying the stories, don't forget to like and subscribe. Now let's relax and jump into tonight's case. Story 1. Police in western France have found the bodies of a mother and her 4 children buried under the terrace of their house in Nantes. They'd been missing since the beginning of April. The family's 2 pet dogs were buried alongside. In early April 2011, something unusual happened at house number 55 on Boulevard Robert Schumann in Nantes, France. Normally lively with the sounds of Xavier and Agnes Dupont de Lyons and their 4 teenage children, the house suddenly became quiet. Even the shutters, usually open even when they were away, remained closed. This worried their neighbors, who were used to hearing the children and their dogs. Concerned, the neighbors called the police. When the police first checked, they didn't find the family. But after more inspections, they made a shocking discovery. Located near Paris, Versailles was the birthplace of Xavier Dupont de Lyons. Born in 1961 to a French count named Bernard Hub Dupont de Lyons and his wife, Geneviève Thiers. Their family had some unusual history. When Bernard left his wife for another woman, Xavier took charge of caring for his mother and sister, Christine. Christine Dupont de Lyons claimed to receive messages from God, which she wrote down during sessions of automatic writing like a surrealist poet. Her beliefs eventually led her to establish a group called the Church of Philadelphia, which Geneviève convinced others was chosen to survive an upcoming apocalypse and rebuild the world. According to Geneviève, Christine was destined to be a reincarnation of both Jesus and Satan, bringing salvation despite inheriting her father's noble title. Xavier wasn't very interested in French customs. He loved luxury cars and extravagant things, especially those from the United States. His mother, Geneviève, supported his lavish lifestyle using money from her followers in the cult. In 1974, on the island of Braz, Xavier met Emmanuel Teneur, and they became close friends for life. Emmanuel even confessed his love for Xavier once, but despite this, they remained best friends. 2 years later, Xavier met Agnes Honor, who was born near Paris on November 9, 1962. She was known for her strong religious beliefs and worked at a Catholic school teaching catechism. Although not much is known about her family, it's clear that Xavier and Agnes had a passionate but brief romance in 1990. Agnes gave birth to their first child, Arthur, soon after they reunited. They married, and Xavier adopted Arthur as his own. 2 years later, they had their first biological child, Thomas, who was named after Emmanuel, chosen as his godfather. After Thomas, they had 2 more children, Anne and Benoit. The family of 6 seemed to be the picture of happiness, with Xavier being a loving father and the children doing well in school, showing promise for the future. Around 2000, Xavier moved his family to the United States to better align with their interests and preferences. However, the venture failed, causing significant financial problems when they returned to France. Xavier accumulated large debts from his unclear professional activities, which were described as sales by French media. Financial issues troubled Xavier for many years, including a failed attempt to import cars from the United States to France. Xavier also started several small businesses, none of which were very successful. These included a hotel and restaurant guide for salespeople, a customer loyalty system for restaurants, and an association called the French Federation of Commerce. He also managed a discreet business where he was listed as the manager, but the earnings from this were minimal. In 2003, he hired 6 salespeople, but his income remained low, around $4,200 annually. His work often took him away from home during the week, putting strain on his marriage. Financial problems began to affect their relationship, worsened by typical marital disagreements. By 2004, Agnes wrote extensively on a French forum about their challenges. She mentioned that Xavier once said a group death in their family wouldn't be catastrophic. By 2009, their growing debt led to a temporary separation. During this time, Xavier blamed Agnes for their financial troubles in numerous letters, causing Agnes emotional distress, affecting her appetite and sleep. Xavier turned to his friend Emmanuel for help. Emmanuel, despite coming from a wealthy family, lived modestly in a small apartment. He generously lent Xavier large sums of money, funded his travels, and even co-signed for the house where Xavier settled with his family in the late 2000s. Once settled at 55 Boulevard Robert Schumann, neighbors saw Agnes as bossy and less pleasant than her husband. Behind closed doors, Agnes faced personal turmoil, viewing Xavier as emotionally distant, rigid, and sometimes abusive. She confided in friends from her prayer group about her fears of Xavier's mother, Genevieve, whom she described as mentally ill and controlling. In January 2011, Xavier hoped for an inheritance following the death of his father, Bernard, despite the gap between his lifestyle and financial struggles. However, Xavier was in for a surprise when he looked into his father's estate. There was hardly anything significant left, just a few papers, a rifle, a card, a ring, and some cash. Xavier took these items shortly after Bernard's death. Within hours, he withdrew cash using his father's card. By February 2nd, he obtained a firearms license, and by March 12th, he purchased a silencer for the rifle. During this time, he practiced shooting in his garden, aiming at a balloon on a stand. Emmanuel, visiting at the time, tried the rifle and saw nothing suspicious. Xavier explained the silencer was to avoid bothering neighbors. On Friday, April 1st, Xavier and Emmanuel went to a shooting range where Bernard's inherited rifle was a topic of interest. The next day, Emmanuel called Xavier several times, speaking with him for nearly an hour. Investigation suggests the horror began on Sunday, April 3rd. That evening, Xavier, Agnes, and their children went to the movies and enjoyed dinner at a restaurant. Everyone was there except Thomas, who was studying at a nearby university hostel. After returning home, Xavier messaged Christine about their dinner outing. The widely accepted theory is that Xavier drugged his family while they slept, then shot and buried them in the garden, including their 2 Labrador dogs. Xavier's alibi was as calculated as his actions. On Monday morning, April 4th, Xavier started contacting people in their circle. He called Agnes' workplace, claiming she was sick, and contacted the children's schools, fabricating stories about their illnesses and accidents. By midday, he sent a letter to Arthur's workplace, saying Arthur was resigning due to Xavier's transfer to Australia. He still had Thomas to deal with. That evening, he met Thomas for dinner near his university residence. Afterward, Thomas returned to his room. The next day, Xavier sent an urgent message to Thomas, claiming Agnes had a bicycle accident and was in a coma at a hospital. This prompted Thomas to rush to Nanta. It's presumed Xavier killed Thomas in the same manner as his siblings and mother. Later that evening, Emmanuel spoke with Xavier for nearly 19 minutes. Around midnight, a friend of Thomas received a message from him, claiming he was home watching a movie with his father. Thomas was likely already dead by then. About an hour later, Xavier emailed Emmanuel to arrange a meeting. Emmanuel reminded Xavier about having power of attorney and the location of a key on a sailboat, which seemed unusual given the circumstances. Xavier's actions were far from discreet. He moved in and out of his house openly, even leaving a note on the door to stop delivering mail. Instead of hiding, he withdrew cash from ATMs and was captured by security cameras. He used his credit cards at restaurants and stayed in hotels under his real name. As Xavier attempted his perfect escape, neighbors began noticing troubling signs. The once open windows of the chalet stayed closed for days. Local children no longer saw the family's 4 children playing, and the dogs stopped barking. Agnes didn't return to work. It seemed as if they had vanished without a trace. Neighbors, alarmed by these clues, contacted the authorities. When officers arrived, they found a nearly empty refrigerator with only a few jars of preserves. The kitchen had a still damp mop, a chess set was left on the living room table, and guitars were on the sofa. The scene was eerie. Beds were stripped, picture frames empty, and closets missing clothes. Amidst the mystery, on April 9th, a letter surfaced addressed to family and friends. It claimed Xavier had been hired by the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration and that the family had to go into witness protection, explaining their sudden disappearance. This story raised suspicion and worry among neighbors, who felt something was not right. Concerned for the family's safety, they urged authorities to investigate further. Meanwhile, Xavier traveled through southern France in his car. As media attention grew, more details emerged. On April 15th, security cameras caught Xavier entering a small hotel near Cannes. He parked, took a bag, and disappeared into nearby woods. This was the last confirmed sighting of him. Curiously, on the same day, Emmanuel called his mother, revealing secrets. He was homosexual, an alcoholic, and depressed. Responding to pleas from neighbors and lacking leads, authorities revisited the family home on April 21, 2011. They noticed a freshly disturbed patch of earth under a terrace, leading to the discovery of a concrete slab. Moments later, they made a grim discovery. The bodies of Agnes and her 4 children were found wrapped in bags, each with multiple gunshot wounds and covered in religious symbols. They had been carefully buried in burlap sacks with quicklime. The family's 2 Labradors were also found buried nearby. Despite an extensive search, no traces of blood, fingerprints, or DNA were found at the scene. Xavier became the most wanted man in France, accused of the brutal massacre. His face was plastered across the news, earning him titles like the Most Wanted Man, the Non-to-Kill Killer, and the Face of Horror. Despite this publicity, he seemed to have mysteriously vanished without a trace. Autopsy results on the 5 bodies revealed a carefully planned execution. Most of the victims had been shot in the head, and traces of a sedative were found in the children, suggesting they were attacked while asleep. Investigators discovered that Agnes, in the master bedroom, had a device for managing sleep apnea that stopped functioning at 3:27 a.m. on April 4th. Speculation arose that Xavier might have hesitated to kill Thomas, possibly due to his position as the heir to the family name. Due to Xavier's close relationship with Emmanuel, the authorities questioned him extensively. Initially cooperative, Emmanuel suggested that Xavier's disappearance might have been a form of pilgrimage before suicide. However, deeper investigation into Emmanuel's life revealed inconsistencies. Police searched his apartment and seized his laptop, uncovering extensive correspondence with Xavier. These emails ranged from mundane to philosophical, with one particularly intriguing email sent on April 6th. This email, along with other details, led investigators to suspect that Emmanuel might have assisted in Xavier's escape. However, Christine also came under scrutiny. During interviews, both she and Genevieve were evasive, painting a superficial picture of Xavier and denying knowledge of the Church of Philadelphia. Despite their denials, investigators unearthed a past complaint from former sect members who had fled in fear after Christine proposed unconventional practices. This revelation about the sect, including wealthy members providing support, suggested a possible source of logistical and material assistance for Xavier. Investigators interrogated all former members and monitored current followers, hoping for any slip-ups that might lead to new leads. Despite efforts, no definitive breakthroughs emerged from these avenues. Meanwhile, Xavier's cell phone records provided clues to his movements within the country, aiding authorities in piecing together his possible escape route. The last concrete trace of Xavier was a security recording from April 15th. Investigators speculated he might have had a weapon in his bag, judging by its shape. Despite signs suggesting he might have taken his own life in the woods, exhaustive searches yielded no body or remains. This led to a theory that Xavier could have been picked up by a boat and taken to another country. In response, an international arrest warrant was issued on May 4th. Nantai police contacted the National Center for Fisheries Monitoring to check if Emmanuel or Xavier owned a motorboat or sailboat, but they found nothing conclusive. They noted that their records might not be fully up to date. On May 9th, Emmanuel was summoned to the Nantai police station for another interview, which turned into an interrogation. Police focused on locating a boat and identifying its captain. At this stage, Emmanuel was unaware of the depth of the investigation or the suspicions surrounding him. When asked about a reference to a sailboat, Emmanuel described it as a coincidence. He disclosed giving Xavier power of attorney to access his safe deposit box in case of an emergency, with the key stored on a model sailboat in an apartment. The safe contained his will, and that was all. Frustrated and empty-handed, The police released Emmanuel after the interrogation. Despite several coincidences, the investigation into Xavier's disappearance remained uncertain. Emmanuel was viewed primarily as a witness, and no arrests had been made. However, police debated the need for further interrogation, leaning on him as the most likely accomplice. A significant breakthrough occurred when investigators reviewed all checks issued to Xavier's company. They discovered an unusual check for $4,200 signed by Emmanuel, linked to an unknown account in Monaco. They immediately requested account statements, but Monaco's strict banking privacy laws required responses through their own regulatory agencies. On September 28th, four police officers revisited Emmanuel's residence. After a long wait, Emmanuel emerged disoriented and, in his underwear, barely able to confirm his identity. His apartment was sparsely furnished, littered with empty alcohol bottles, suggesting a state of deep loneliness. Emmanuel hadn't received any letters or calls from Xavier, which troubled him deeply. Police no longer considered him a suspect, but rather a lost soul, raising doubts about their investigative focus. Xavier had become one of France's most wanted alleged murderers, possibly internationally notorious. In 2015, a journalist claimed to have received a letter from Xavier asserting he was alive. Handwriting, DNA, and fingerprint analyses were conducted on the note, but they yielded no new information. On January 9, 2018, police raided a monastery in Ribrun-sur-Arne after a tip-off about a monk resembling Xavier. After 2 hours of intense searching, they determined it was a case of mistaken identity. On January 18, 2019, Emmanuel died of a heart attack. That same year, authorities mistakenly arrested a man believed to be Xavier at Glasgow Airport in Scotland. Another theory suggested Xavier might be in South America, particularly Argentina, where his language skills and charisma could aid in blending in. Over the years, the Church of Philadelphia has persisted and reportedly experienced a resurgence. This secretive group, active for nearly 40 years, remains withdrawn from the world. In the summer of 2019, two brothers raised within the sect filed new complaints against Christine and Genevieve. For 2 decades, these women have staunchly proclaimed that Xavier is alive, innocent and hiding in the United States under witness protection. They refute the contents of the April 9th letter as pure fabrication. While this could be seen as denial, it might also obscure certain truths. Since 2011, the case has been fraught with speculation and false leads, leading authorities down endless paths. The crucial question remains, will justice ever be served for Agnes and her children? Despite a bleak outlook, some believe that the truth will eventually come to light. Story 2. Back in 2012 at the London Summer Olympics, Puerto Rican boxer Felix Verdejo Sanchez was a rising star. He was considered a diamond, one of the most promising athletes in his country, expected to win titles and gold medals. Everyone believed this talented and driven young man would reach incredible heights in the sports world. However, in 2021, Felix's name hit the headlines again, but this time in the crime section. This is a story about a teenage crush that turned into an obsession, leading to a horrifying tragedy. The same boxer who delivered the knockout of the year in 2014 and was highly praised by 2-time Olympic champion Vasyl Lomachenko almost faced a death sentence, but ended up with a life sentence instead. Despite undeniable evidence and confessions from his accomplice, Felix still refuses to admit guilt. Felix Verdejo was born on May 19, 1993 in San Juan, Puerto Rico. He grew up in a modest, large family and had a passion for sports from a young age. Initially, he dreamed of a career in baseball. However, fate had other plans. When he was 9, a family friend visited with his son, who was the same age. The boys started playing in the yard, but ended up in a fight. Their parents separated them, and the father of the future star remarked that if Felix wanted to fight, he should do it with boxing gloves. After that fight, Felix asked to be taken to a local gym. From his first training session, he fell in love with boxing. At 16, he won the Pan American Junior Championships. A year later, he clinched his country's championship and then competed in the London Olympics, reaching the quarterfinals. That same year, his professional career took off. Felix had 29 fights, securing 27 victories, and in 2014, he delivered the best knockout of the year against Sergio Villanueva. In 2015, Felix won his first championship belt with the WBO Latino title, which he successfully defended 6 more times over the next 2 years. Everyone who saw him fight believed he was destined to make history in world boxing. Now, let's meet Keisha Rodriguez. She was born in November 1993 in San Juan. Her full name is Keisha Marlene Rodriguez Ortiz. Her parents, Jose and Kayla Rodriguez, had another daughter, Nicole, and also raised Kayla's son, Jonathan, from a previous marriage. Keisha was an outgoing and sociable girl who did well in school, loved animals, and dreamed of becoming a veterinarian. Her best friend was her sister, Barisa, with whom she shared all her secrets and worries. Keisha attended the same school as Felix Verdejo, who was the same age. They had known each other since childhood, and during their teenage years, a romantic relationship blossomed between them. In 2011, Rodriguez's parents divorced, and Kayla moved to relatives in Florida. Her daughters, who were already adults by then, decided to stay in San Juan. Despite each of the sisters living their own lives, they continued to stay in close contact and shared everything that was happening to them. At the age of 18, a promising boxer who had already participated in the Olympic Games had an affair with a young schoolgirl and aspiring model, Elisa Maria Santiago Sierra. At that time, Elisa was only 14 years old and still in school. But even then, she made big plans for the future with the promising and world-famous athlete. In addition, Elisa's parents were not at all against this relationship. Felix, who was attractive and talented and always had many admirers, became a boxing star who literally basked in the rays of fame and was surrounded by female attention. He did not miss the opportunity to have a fling or an affair on the side, despite having a serious relationship with Elisa. He continued to meet with his school friend Keisha, Keisha's sister Barisa, and her mother, Kayla Rodriguez, knew about the affair and did not approve of the relationship. In addition, the situation was very ambiguous. On the one hand, Elisa considered herself the only woman and great love of the athlete, was preparing for the wedding and made far-reaching plans for their joint future. On the other hand, Keisha knew that her lover had a fiancé, but deep down, the naive girl herself still hoped to be the one. In 2016, Felix married Elisa, who was nearly 19 at the time. By then, Elisa had become a fairly famous model with tens of thousands of social media followers and had opened her own beauty studio specializing in eyelash extensions. In August of the same year, just a few months after their wedding, Felix was involved in a serious motorcycle accident. He was taken to the hospital with head injuries, bruises, and lacerations. His trainer, Ricky Marquez, feared that this incident might derail his promising career. However, Felix defied the odds, made a rapid recovery, and soon returned to the ring. In September 2019, Felix shared a photo on social media with Keisha, who was in the late stages of pregnancy. He captioned it, "Soon, I will meet my daddy's princess." A month later, he announced the birth of his daughter, Miranda Verdejo Santiago. Publicly, Felix appeared to be a loving husband, caring father, and exemplary family man. However, he continued to see Keisha behind his wife's back. Elisa later admitted she suspected her husband of infidelity, but each time, Felix tearfully promised to end the affair. Keisha repeatedly tried to end the relationship, but Felix wouldn't let her go. He threatened her, saying that if she found someone else, it would not be good for her or her new partner. Despite everything, Keisha, who had loved Felix since high school, continued to have feelings for him. Rodriguez pursued her passion for animals and got a job at a veterinary medicine and aesthetic center. Her colleagues described her as conscientious, hardworking, and very responsible. She lived with 2 dogs and a cat, whom she adored. In 2020, Elisa discovered her husband's correspondence with several women, including Keisha. Furious, she threw Felix out of the house, threatening to file for divorce and prevent him from seeing their daughter. These threats impacted Felix significantly, especially since his career was in a slump at the time, and he didn't need additional problems. For a while, he stopped seeing Keisha, but continued to control her movements. After a few months of secret visits, their relationship resumed, and in April 2021, Keisha found out she was pregnant. She took a rapid test from the drugstore, which confirmed her suspicions. She first called her sister, who knew about her complicated relationship with Felix, and told her everything. Keisha, already 27, was ready to have the child and decided against an abortion. She hoped Felix would accept the news positively. However, Felix was far from pleased. He angrily told her to go to the doctor and insisted that if the pregnancy was confirmed, she should have an abortion. Keisha firmly refused, but the boxer began to threaten her and insist. Felix said that an illegitimate child would finally destroy his reputation, and this he could not allow. After Keisha's visit to the hospital, her pregnancy was confirmed and she now had a certificate to prove it. She called Felix and told him everything, which made him furious. Felix shouted and demanded that Keisha immediately get rid of the child, but she again responded with a categorical refusal. Then, the athlete decided to go on the sly, saying that he did not believe her and wanted to personally look at the issued medical certificate. He appointed Keisha a meeting in the evening in a crowded place, which did not surprise her because they always tried not to draw attention to themselves and did not stand out in front of anyone. A few days before the meeting, the boxer stopped by his old friend, Luis Antonio Cadiz, who worked in a local machine shop and also had ties with the criminal world, selling illegal drugs. Felix briefly outlined the situation and asked him to help him get rid of his pregnant mistress. Luis had previously been in the field of vision of the police, and the prospect of being in prison scared him. But the athlete was persistent, assured that everything would go smoothly and the police would never come after them. Besides, Felix promised him an impressive cash reward, and Luis agreed. With the support of an accomplice, Felix called Keisha and told her that he wanted to meet her on the evening of April 29th to confirm her pregnancy and decide what to do next. Immediately after talking to her lover, Keisha called her sister back and told her everything. She still hoped that Felix would accept her child and would not insist on an abortion, but Barais found the situation quite alarming. She knew that the boyfriend had threatened her sister and was worried that he might do something to her. Barais called her mother and shared her concerns, but even together they could not dissuade Keisha from that fateful meeting. At the appointed time, Rodriguez, taking a doctor's note, arrived at the meeting in her own Kia Forte automobile. Verdejo drove there in his pickup truck, in the back of which Luis was hiding. Keisha immediately got into the athlete's car and showed him the results of the tests. He once again talked about terminating the pregnancy, but Keisha, crying, again responded with a refusal. Against this background, the couple began to quarrel violently, turning to shouting. Then Felix suddenly hit Keisha in the head with his fist, causing her to immediately lose consciousness. While Keisha was unconscious, Felix took a syringe with a large dose of illegal substances hidden in the glove compartment of the car, which Luis had obtained at his request, and injected Keisha. Then, together with his accomplice, they carried her to the back of the car, where there were already prepared pieces of wire and a concrete block. The men tied Rodriguez up, attached the load, and then covered her with a tarp so that no one would accidentally see anything. Felix then returned to the pickup truck while his accomplice got behind the wheel of Keisha's vehicle. Together they drove to the bridge over the San Jose Lagoon. It was virtually deserted at night, and the men, making sure no one could see them, threw Keisha, still alive, into the water. Afterward, however, they decided to fire a few test shots in pursuit, using the firearms they had brought with them so as not to leave the victim any chance. Having finished the massacre, each of the perpetrators went home. Keisha's co-workers were the first to worry when she didn't show up at the Veterinary Medicine and Aesthetics Center the next day. Keisha had always been very responsible and couldn't just not show up for work without notifying anyone. Since she didn't answer the phone, it was decided to contact her sister to find out what happened. After several unsuccessful attempts to contact her sister, she went to her house. No one answered the door, but Bars had a spare key, so she got in without difficulty. However, She was met only by hungry animals who had not eaten anything for almost 24 hours. Now, Bars was already in a panic because she realized that something terrible or irreparable had happened to Keisha. She immediately called her mother and told her everything, then reported her suspicions and the threats to her sister to the police. She also called Felix, but he claimed that he had spent the previous evening and night at home with his family and had not gone to any meeting. The missing girl's mother took the first flight from Florida to San Juan. She thought that her lover might have taken her daughter to a private clinic and paid for her to have an abortion without her consent. Keisha didn't even want to think about the fact that Keisha was no longer alive. The first thing to do was to question the missing girl's neighbors and co-workers, but they didn't notice anything suspicious and couldn't provide the investigation with any useful information. In parallel, messages about the disappearance of Rodriguez were posted on popular social networks, with requests for those who knew anything about her fate or current whereabouts to respond. The case quickly received wide publicity, and when it became known that the missing girl was in a long-term relationship with a famous athlete and was expecting a child from him, reporters literally lined up to interview any of Rodriguez's family members. The relatives did not hold anything back and spoke out about their suspicions, among other things blaming Felix for the incident. On April 30th, Keisha's car was found abandoned on the east side of the city with her documents and personal belongings inside. No signs of struggle were found in the interior, giving a faint hope of finding its owner alive. On May 1st, a passerby strolling on the bridge over the lagoon saw a strange shape resembling a human body in the shallow water. He reported his discovery to the police, who soon recovered from the water the body of a young woman, presumably the same one the whole city had been looking for several days. Members of the Rodriguez family who arrived to identify the body hoped to the last that it was not Keisha, but their hopes were not realized. The body had been in the water for several days and changed a lot, but the girl was immediately identified by a remarkable tattoo on her arm. When news of the gruesome discovery hit the press, the residents of the city revolted and began to go out to spontaneous rallies, demanding punishment for those responsible. The same day, Verdejo was detained and taken to the police station for questioning, but the athlete categorically denied his involvement and claimed that on the night of Keisha's disappearance, he was at home with his family. As there was nothing to charge him with, Felix was released on his own recognizance. One of the key witnesses was the athlete's legal wife, who at the first interrogation admitted that she was aware of his affair with Keisha, but that she had heard about her rival's pregnancy for the first time. On top of that, she did not confirm her husband's alibi, saying that he was not at home on the night of the murder. The first thing investigators did was check traffic surveillance footage on the way to the bridge from which Keisha was thrown. That's how they found Felix's pickup truck and the victim's car traveling behind each other, but the Kia Forte was clearly not driven by its owner. On the same day, the boxer's car was seized for examination, and in its body they found some hair of the deceased. Luis was the first to surrender to the police, promising to tell the whole truth in exchange for a reduced sentence. Felix was also taken into custody, but he refused to cooperate with the investigation, did not answer questions, and continued to deny his guilt despite the presence of irrefutable evidence. A firearm was seized from Felix, which he used to shoot the victim from the bridge, and for which he had an official permit. Also, a cell phone check confirmed the fact that Felix, Luis, and Keisha were in the same location on that fateful night. Keisha's final farewell was on May 8th, and the funeral ceremony was all over the national news. It was a kind of calling for the perpetrators of the tragedy to be punished to the full extent of the law, as well as an action to draw public attention to the problem of gender violence. The coffin with Rodriguez's body was brought to the cemetery not in a traditional hearse, but in a white carriage over which white flower petals were thrown from the air. Many famous Puerto Rican names, including show business stars, athletes, politicians, and public figures, have spoken out about the high-profile incident. Verdejo was charged with carjacking, kidnapping, premeditated murder, and the murder of an unborn child. All of these crimes together carried the death penalty, but the relatives of the deceased, from the very beginning, asked the court to elect a sentence of life imprisonment for the killer so that he would suffer in captivity for the rest of his life. The hearing was repeatedly postponed due to the worldwide coronavirus pandemic, but in the spring of 2021, the trial was held in virtual mode. The court found that the crime was committed with particular cruelty against a pregnant woman and involved multiple individuals acting in conspiracy. The details of that night were mainly reconstructed thanks to the testimony of Luis, who admitted his guilt. He confessed that he obtained the drug for injection and provided the wire and concrete block used to dispose of the body, all at Felix's request. Despite Felix's continued claims of innocence, his denials didn't influence the case's outcome. Meanwhile, Felix's wife, who testified in court, filed for divorce shortly after his arrest. She focused on developing her business and raising their young daughter. Reports suggest that Elisa Santiago has since remarried. In an interview, Elisa revealed she received anonymous calls and messages with death threats, including threats against her and Miranda. While some suspected her of orchestrating the crime, no evidence supported these claims. In the summer of 2023, the jury, after reviewing all the evidence and witness testimonies, was ready to deliver the final verdict. Felix Verdejo and his accomplice, Luis Cadiz, were found guilty on all charges. However, sentencing had not yet occurred, with the next court hearing scheduled for mid-November 2023. But on November 3rd, both men faced a maximum sentence of life in prison for the 4 felonies they were originally charged with. Story 3. I just remember being asleep and I hear a million pieces of glass just crashing. Celeste, and I just ran out of bed. Celeste, breathe, sweetie, please don't leave me. Don't leave me. Oh my God, he killed her. Absolutely unbelievable that the court decided to grant him mercy, even though he showed Celeste nothing. See, the more I was learning, the angrier I was becoming. There is nothing that is about the victim. The victim doesn't exist. I was made commitments, promises, and killing me, I believed it all. Today we're going to look at another troubling case. In many romantic comedies, it's common to see the main character chasing and even stalking the girl he likes. Eventually, she gives in to his persistence, realizes no one loves her like he does, and returns his feelings. On screen, this seems cute and funny, making the guy look like a true romantic willing to do anything for his love. But in real life, this behavior can have the opposite effect, scaring the person and even leading them to call the police. Celeste Mano's story started harmlessly. She was getting attention from a coworker, which she always ignored, hoping he would get the hint and leave her alone. Unfortunately, one careless action by Celeste changed everything, turning the admirer into an obsessive stalker. Another thoughtless act led to irreversible consequences. Celeste became genuinely fearful for her life, sought help from the police multiple times, and confided in friends about her concerns, but felt powerless and unsupported. This tragedy might have been avoided if the police hadn't waited for a crime to be committed before taking action. Let's examine this case closely and trace the events that led to the tragic end of this young woman. Who was Celeste Mano? Born Celeste Cristano on November 30th, 1997, in northeastern Melbourne, Victoria, Australia, she was the youngest of 2 children of Aggie Diaro and Tony Mano. She grew up with her older brother Alessandro. According to some sources, their father left when they were young, remarried, but stayed in contact and supported his children. In school, Celeste was social, active, and friendly. She played sports, danced, was the cheerleading team captain, and had big dreams. She initially wanted to become a lawyer and enrolled at the University of Melbourne to study criminal and civil law. But towards the end of her studies, she found law boring, switched to advertising and marketing, and in 2018 got hired by a large, fast-growing e-commerce company. Celeste was smart and talented, quickly mastering her job, and rose from a call center worker to head of a department in just a few years. She was seen as one of the most promising employees. Everyone admired Celeste for her intelligence, initiative, and ability to organize work efficiently. Besides her professional skills, Celeste had a striking appearance and a flawless figure. During her university years, she even competed in the university beauty contest and placed among the top 3. She was used to significant male attention from a young age, but was very particular in choosing her partners. At the company, A colleague named Lou Nader, who was almost 16 years older than Celeste, took a keen interest in her from the moment she started. Lou was quite reserved and unsociable, with no apparent career ambitions, having stayed in the same minor position for a long time. Celeste, being kind and open, didn't want to hurt Lou's feelings and always politely declined his advances. Despite her rejections, Lou kept trying to get her attention in various ways. Celeste would sometimes joke to lighten the mood, but was clear that she wasn't interested. Lou misinterpreted Celeste's politeness as playing hard to get and decided he would win her over no matter what. His persistent and awkward advances became annoying, but Celeste kept her composure, hoping he would eventually give up or focus on someone else. Instead, Lou became obsessed with her, and everyone around noticed his relentless pursuit. Celeste confided in a close friend that she would never consider a relationship with Lou. She found him odd and unpredictable, was not attracted to men without ambitions, and the significant age difference was also a factor. Despite his efforts, Lou stood no chance with her. His obsession even caused him to neglect his work duties, which led to 3 reprimands and warnings from senior management. Finally, in early autumn of 2019, Lou was dismissed for his poor performance. Lou was very upset when he was fired, almost crying as he packed his things. Celeste felt mixed emotions. She was relieved that he would stop bothering her, but also felt guilty, believing his dismissal was partly her fault. As a department manager, she thanked Lou for his service, escorted him to the exit, and tried to encourage him by patting him on the shoulder and sincerely wishing him luck. However, this seemingly harmless act turned out to be a fatal mistake. Lou interpreted Celeste's gesture as a sign that she had feelings for him, but was afraid to start an office romance due to her position. With nothing left to hinder their relationship in his mind, Lou was convinced they could be together. Overwhelmed by his emotions, Lou unexpectedly kissed Celeste on the cheek. Stunned by his audacity, Celeste didn't know how to react. She hurried back into the office building without saying a word. This reaction convinced Lou that Celeste had feelings for him and that he shouldn't give up. A few days after being fired, Lou created a social media account, found Celeste's profile, and sent her a friend request. Initially, she accepted it, thinking it was harmless. But when he started bombarding her with requests to meet and go out, she tried to politely decline before blocking him. The next day, Lou sent her another friend request from a new profile. Celeste ignored it, but he began commenting on her photos, praising her looks, and suggesting they would make a great couple. She adjusted her profile settings so only friends could message or comment. During a family celebration, Celeste complained about the persistent pursuer, recounting the bizarre incident on the day he was fired. Her family listened but assumed it wasn't serious and that he would eventually lose interest. Lou didn't have Celeste's personal phone number as they had only communicated through work channels, but now she started receiving strange romantic messages from an unknown number. She immediately guessed who they were from. Lou sent her romantic poems, admired her beauty, and tried to coax her into going out. Celeste answered his call once, trying to have a serious conversation to explain that nothing could happen between them and to persuade him to stop. However, Lou didn't listen and only commented on how pleasant her voice was and how glad he was that she had finally picked up. After this, Celeste tried to block Lou, but he called from new numbers each time. Eventually, she changed her number, but within a week, Lou somehow found it and continued his telephone harassment. This continued for about half a year as Celeste sought protection. Celeste tried to ignore her crazed admirer, blocking his numbers and fake social media pages, not responding to his messages and attempting to live her usual life. However, the messages kept coming and their tone gradually shifted from romantic to bold and threatening. Lou no longer asked to meet her. He demanded it, detailing delusional intimate fantasies about what he would do with her. The situation worsened when Lou started following her from work to home, learning where she lived. At first, Celeste didn't realize he was physically stalking her. She occasionally glimpsed him near her home, but dismissed it as her imagination, a product of nerves. When she finally understood that Lou was indeed following her, she decided to seek police protection. Celeste asked the police to issue a special order prohibiting Lou from approaching her in her home. However, the officers were indifferent and even mocking. They told her that writing poems or expressing explicit fantasies in text messages wasn't illegal or punishable. Without evidence that Lou was following her, they asked her to leave the precinct and not hinder their efforts to catch real criminals. Despite her distress, she couldn't obtain the restraining order she desperately needed. For another 6 months, Celeste continued to suffer from Lou's relentless harassment. She frequently noticed his car parked across the street from her office during workdays and saw him driving past her house several times in the evenings. She constantly felt his gaze, making her nervous and tense. In August 2020, Celeste approached the police again, this time with photo and video evidence on her phone showing that Lou was indeed following her. A different officer took Celeste's statement, this time taking the situation more seriously and expressing surprise at his colleague's previous indifference. He advised her to go to court immediately, where a restraining order was issued against Lou. He was notified that he could no longer call, approach, or try to contact her in any way. Clearly, Lou did not expect this turn of events and disappeared from Celeste's sight for a few weeks. For the first time in a long while, she felt free and believed that her harasser would no longer bother her. However, her relief was premature. Less than a month later, she began receiving messages from unknown numbers. In these messages, Lou first pleaded and then demanded that she retract her statement and remove the restraining order, claiming it interfered with their romantic relationship. After receiving several messages, Celeste immediately went to the police as Lou had violated the restraining order. This time, Lou was fined and warned that further violations would lead to much more severe consequences, including potential jail time. Following this, Lou did not make his presence known for almost 2 months, and Celeste hoped he had finally left her alone. In September 2020, Celeste met a young man named Chris Riedsdale, who was just a year older than her. They quickly discovered they had many common interests, views on life and goals leading to a romantic relationship. Celeste told Chris about the harassment from her former admirer and admitted that although Lou hadn't contacted her for over a month, she still felt anxious. Chris surrounded her with care and attention, doing everything he could to make her feel safe and worry-free. In early November, Celeste invited Chris to a family dinner to introduce him to her parents and brother. Her family immediately liked Chris, and her mother even joked that Celeste was now in safe hands. The next few weeks passed peacefully, with no sign of Lou trying to contact Celeste or appearing in her life. The young woman was happy, spending all her free time with Chris, and it seemed she no longer worried about Lou bursting back into her life or harm. On November 15, 2020, the love-struck couple went out on a date, sitting in a cafe and enjoying each other's company. Celeste suggested they capture the moment with a selfie, which turned out very romantic. The couple was sitting at the same table, embracing, smiling, and looking very happy. Celeste liked the photo so much that she decided to use it as her profile picture on social media to share news of her new relationship and signal that things were serious. Chris also posted the photo on his page with a touching caption about how he loved this girl and would do everything to keep her eyes sparkling with happiness, as they did in the picture. Unfortunately, this outing turned out to be the couple's last. On the evening of their date, Chris dropped Celeste off at her home, and they said goodbye, planning to meet the next day. Celeste spent about an hour in the kitchen with her mother, talking about her boyfriend before heading to bed, since she had to get up early for work the next morning. On Monday, November 16, 2020, around 4 o'clock in the morning, Celeste's mother, Eggy, was awakened by the sound of breaking glass. At first, she didn't understand what was happening. Then she heard suspicious noises, banging, screams, and commotion. Initially, she thought the noises were coming from the street, but she soon realized they were inside the house. Eggy jumped out of bed, threw on her robe, and rushed to her daughter's room. She flung open the door and saw, in the dim light, someone literally jumping away from Celeste's bed before escaping through the broken window. When Eggy turned on the light, she was confronted with a horrifying scene. Her daughter was lying in a pool of her own blood, covered in cuts and small shards of broken glass. Celeste was struggling to breathe, gasping for air, her eyes wide open and staring upward. Her mother immediately called emergency services and tried to stem the deep, bleeding wounds on her daughter's body until the paramedics arrived. Unfortunately, it was too late to save her. By the time the police and doctors arrived, she had passed away. The medical examiners later found over 20 penetrating stab wounds on her body, with the fatal blow to her heart. Analyzing the situation and comparing the scene of the incident with Eggy's testimony, it was clear that Celeste's attacker had entered through the broken window. The police concluded that the assailant took less than 3 minutes to break into Celeste's room through the window and carried out the attack before her mother could enter. The suspect used a large butcher's knife, striking randomly. Celeste tried to defend herself, as indicated by the numerous cuts on her arms. When asked if her daughter had any enemies, Eggy could only recall one name, Lou Sacco, who had obsessively pursued Celeste for over a year, harassing her with calls and threatening messages. This information was corroborated by other family members, friends, and colleagues. At the scene, the suspect left a large number of bloody fingerprints, and DNA was found on a fence he jumped over while fleeing, as he had injured his hand. It was imperative to detain and interrogate Lou immediately as the prime suspect in the case and to verify and compare all the evidence and witness statements. Lou was arrested the same day, but initially denied his involvement, insisting that he loved Celeste and would never harm her. However, forensic results soon confirmed that the bloody fingerprints found in the victim's room and on the fence were his. Law enforcement also pointed to the restraining order against approaching Celeste, which Lou had violated. Additionally, it was discovered that the evening before the tragedy, Lou had purchased a hammer and a large knife at a local hardware store, as captured on surveillance camera at the checkout. He later used the hammer to break into the house through the window and the knife to fatally attack Celeste. The evidence against Lou was irrefutable, further underscored by his long-term surveillance of the victim, knowing virtually everything about her. However, the final trigger for him was the photo Celeste posted on social media with her new boyfriend. After seeing this, Lou went to the store, purchased a knife and a hammer, and under the cover of night, went to Celeste's home to end her life. His actions were seen as deliberate and premeditated criminal activity, yet Lou's behavior was erratic, raising doubts about his mental stability. Notably, Lou, nearly 39 years old, had never married, continued to live with his parents, had almost no friends, and never held a job for long. People described him as nervous and introverted, with severe socialization issues. Additionally, Lou had a biological brother who was serving a lengthy sentence for a criminal act at that time. A forensic psychiatric evaluation was ordered for Lou, and his attorney insisted that his client needed not imprisonment, but specialized treatment as he required professional help. This argument outraged Celeste's family, who feared that the cruel criminal might evade punishment. Psychiatric experts, after interviewing Lou and analyzing his behavior, concluded that he did indeed suffer from some mental disorders. However, at the time of the crime, he was fully aware of his actions and had prepared for the crime in advance, planning the details. This meant that Lou, despite his attempts to feign insanity, would undoubtedly have to face trial. In the autumn of 2023, 3 years after Celeste's tragic death, Lou finally appeared in court. During this time, he repeatedly tried to prove that he was mentally ill and therefore could not be convicted of deliberate criminal activity. He spent most of this period in a psychiatric clinic. In the courtroom, Lou behaved calmly and detachedly, seemingly uninterested in the proceedings around him. He admitted his guilt, but insisted that he had not intended to end Celeste's life, merely to win her love. However, the jury unanimously found Lou guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 36 years in prison, with the possibility of parole no sooner than after 30 years. Celeste's parents repeatedly pointed out that their daughter had contacted the police as early as 2020, hoping for protection from Lou. However, her complaint was not accepted because, according to the existing legislation, only attempts to physically contact the victim were considered harassment, while online stalking and phone harassment were not criminally punishable. Throughout the 3 years of preparing for the trial, Celeste's mother, Eggy, together with professional lawyers and some activist organizations, worked on developing Celeste's law. This law aimed to introduce criminal liability for stalking on social networks through text messages and emails. Eggy believed this would help protect many women and girls and prevent the tragic fate that befell her daughter. She aimed to achieve significant changes in the existing criminal legislation and directly approached the Legislative Commission of Victoria. Eggy developed over 40 recommendations and amendments, but almost all of them were ultimately rejected. Investigations showed that in the vast majority of cases, online stalkers limit themselves to their invisible presence and do not seek to contact their victims in any other way. The amendments that were made only help to limit access to confidential information on social networks. In cases of severe stalking involving threats, a restraining order could be issued, similar to if the person were pursued in real life. However, here was still no criminal liability for such crimes currently. For such actions, a stalker might only receive a verbal warning, and upon repeated violations they might be fined. Though not always, Celeste's law has yet to be enacted. Story 4. The 2008 case of Emma Ljungsteg shocked Europe and stands as one of the most brutal in Swedish forensic history. Despite some arguing that the perpetrator was insane and pushing to close the case due to insufficient evidence, the true nature of the criminal was revealed during the trial. Emma Ljungsteg, born February 16, 1985 in Stockholm, spent most of her youth there. Raised in a modest family as the younger of two sisters, she married her high school sweetheart Nicholas at 19. They were both young, and by the time of their marriage, Emma was expecting a child. At 20, Emma became a mother to Max, and a year and a half later, she had a daughter named Saga. Despite their two children, the couple struggled with the demands of family life, often arguing over small issues and finding no common ground. Shortly after Saga's birth, they decided to part ways. Then came the difficult and painful issue of child custody. Nicholas wanted not only to support the children financially, but also to be actively involved in their lives and upbringing. Emma was open to this, but soon she started a new romantic relationship. She moved to a small town called Aruga, about 150 kilometers from Stockholm, to be with her new partner and took the children with her. Nicholas opposed this move as he wanted to see his kids daily. The former spouses repeatedly clashed in court over this matter, and Nicholas even threatened Emma, prompting her to report him to the police. The conflict couldn't be resolved amicably, and both parents began to fight for sole custody. Emma's new partner was Tawny Hellberg, whom she met online. They quickly bonded, and their relationship became romantic. Tawny wasn't put off by the fact that Emma, at 23, had two children from her previous marriage. He was eager to start a family and embrace them as his own. The couple initially lived in a small house that Tawny had inherited, but once they decided to marry, they moved to a larger home with enough space for each child to have their own room. At that time, Tawny had a stable job with a good salary, while Emma focused on raising the children and managing the home. With her background in design, she planned to return to her profession in the future. They had planned a wedding for the summer of 2008, but those plans were not meant to be. On March 17, 2008, a typical Monday, Tawny left for work early, leaving Emma at home with their 3-year-old son Max and 1.5-year-old daughter Saga. In the evening, as Emma prepared dinner, she awaited Tawny's return and chatted online with her sister Katarina about a gift for their parents' upcoming wedding anniversary. At around 6:30 p.m., Tawny called Emma to let her know he was running late and said they could start dinner without him. After the brief call, Emma resumed her chores, fed the kids, and then returned to her computer to continue messaging Katarina. At 7:07 p.m., their conversation was abruptly cut off mid-sentence. Katarina found this odd, as she saw Emma typing but never sending the message. 5 minutes later, Katarina called Emma but got no response. She then reached out to Tawny to check on the situation. Tawny, who was on his way home, assured Katarina that everything was likely fine and that Emma might be preoccupied with the children. He said Emma would call back as soon as she could. When Tawny arrived home, he was startled to find the front door open. Inside, he noticed a mess, assuming it was from the children playing. However, he soon spotted brown stains and realized with horror that it was blood. He called out for Emma and the kids, but no one answered. In the hallway, he found what he initially thought was a doll lying in an unnatural position. As he got closer, he realized it was Saga, lying in a pool of blood with her head and face severely disfigured. Nearby, her brother lay in a similarly horrific condition with a fractured skull. Their mother was also on the floor, covered in blood, her face shattered and disfigured. It appeared none of them were alive. Overcome with shock, Tawny called emergency services with trembling hands and reported the scene. At that moment, Emma shuddered and emitted a loud groan. Police officers and paramedics immediately arrived on the scene and found a weak pulse in all 3 victims, quickly beginning resuscitation. The scene was horrifying. No one understood what kind of beast could do this to a young woman and her children, but saving their lives was the priority, so all efforts were focused on getting the victims to the nearest hospital for assistance. From the outset, paramedics expressed doubts about whether the victims could be brought to the hospital alive. However, all 3 were still alive when they arrived at the medical facility. They were diagnosed with open head injuries, severe brain damage, and extensive blood loss. No prognosis was given by the doctors, but they did the best they could. Max and Saga were in critical condition. Even if their lives could be saved, it was unlikely they would ever breathe on their own. Emma's condition was assessed as very serious but stable. The young woman was put into a medically induced coma and connected to life support machines, hoping her body could cope. While doctors fought for the lives of the victims, forensic experts worked at the scene, trying to find clues and reconstruct the crime. Inside the house, chaos reigned. Scattered belongings, blood on the floor and walls. Unfortunately, the medics had left behind a lot of clutter, moving items around to access the victims. The floor where Emma, Max, and Saga lay was trampled on, and now the medics had to figure out which footprints belonged to them and if the perpetrator's prints were there. Remarkably, the intruder had massacred the victims in at most 13 minutes, as the last message from Emma to her sister was sent at 7:07 p.m., and at 7:20 p.m. a call was made to the police by a frightened Tawny. The brutality with which the perpetrator massacred the victims indicated a personal motive and deep dislike. The weapon of the crime was a blunt, heavy object, presumably a hammer, but it was not found at the scene, suggesting the perpetrator took it with them. From the start, Tawny was the prime suspect. He was not married to Emma and was not the father of her children, leading to speculation that a domestic quarrel could have turned into a bloodbath. The grief-stricken man was immediately questioned but had an ironclad alibi. Firstly, he was indeed late at work, confirmed by his boss and colleagues, and secondly, at the time of the brutal massacre, he was walking down the street, caught on CCTV cameras. Nevertheless, a detailed statement was taken from Tawny, as he might have seen or heard something important that could help in the investigation. However, he could not remember anything specific. Everything seemed normal until he saw the mess and bodies lying on the floor. The only thing that alerted him was the unlocked front door, indicating Emma might have let the criminal in. After questioning, Tawny was released. By then, he had already informed Emma's family, and her parents immediately rushed to Aruga from Stockholm. Together, they went straight to the hospital, but on the way, they learned from the news on the radio that Max and Saga had died of their injuries without regaining consciousness. The new suspect was Emma's ex-husband and father of the children, Nicholas. The couple had been divorced for more than a year and parted peacefully. However, they constantly quarreled, sued for custody of the children, and Nicholas even threatened his ex-spouse, which she reported to the police. It seemed that everything fit. After the breakup, the young woman took the children to another city to be with her new partner. Their father, not having achieved custody through the court and harboring hostility toward Emma, decided to take a desperate step in a fit of rage and harmed the children. Nicholas was immediately tracked down and taken into custody, but he seemed crushed by the news of Max and Saga's deaths, sobbing and constantly asking if there was some mistake. When he was charged with what had happened, he was at first stunned and then began shouting that he would never hurt his children, whom he adored. When asked where Nicholas was at the time of the crime, he replied that he was away in another city on business for a day. It sounded strange, but soon his alibi was confirmed. The man was indeed 120 miles away from the crime scene, when someone was massacring his ex-wife and children. Searching for clues and fearing for the life of the sole survivor, forensic investigators remained active at the scene, trying to find any evidence or traces of the attacker. The perpetrator had obviously worn gloves and left no fingerprints. Identifying the shoe prints was much more difficult because the house was visited by a dozen doctors who rendered assistance and took out the victims. It was necessary to collect all the footprints and determine which ones did not belong to the medics, Nicholas, or the victims themselves. Law enforcers feared that the criminal, having learned that Emma had survived, might sneak into the hospital to finish what he had started. After all, she was a crucial witness, and if she regained consciousness and could testify, she would certainly give him away. Therefore, a 24-hour guard was posted outside young Emma's room. At the same time, neighbors were interviewed in search of possible witnesses. One woman recalled that around 5 in the evening, a stranger in black clothes was walking around Emma and Nicholas's house. She thought it was strange, but could not see the person's face because it was hidden by a hood. However, the neighbor suggested that it could be a girl because the figure was short and fragile. The same figure in black clothes and with a hood on their head was also captured by a street surveillance camera located on a store a couple of minutes' walk from the crime scene. It appeared to law enforcement that the person in the video was a short, frail-looking girl. But who was she, and why would she wish harm on Emma and her children? The recording was shown to Nicholas to find out his opinion about who the stranger could be and whether he had any assumptions. From the first frames, his face changed, turning pale. He then said that it could be his ex-girlfriend, 31-year-old Christina Schur, although he could not be sure. Christina Schur, Nicholas's former sweetheart, was born in Hanover, Germany, in 1977. When she was still a child, her father left the family and practically stopped communicating with her, which negatively affected her mental state and behavior. The girl grew up willful and purposeful, but had a complex character. As a teenager, she went to the United States on an exchange program and lived in New York for several years. She received a good education in history and archaeology, traveled extensively throughout Europe, and took part in excavations and expeditions. In the summer of 2006, she went to Greece, to the island of Crete, where she got a job as a tour guide at a popular hotel. In July, 26-year-old Nicholas came on vacation and immediately attracted Christina. He also liked the smart, interesting, and educated girl with whom he had an affair from the first days of acquaintance. Christina was 29 years old at that time, but the small age difference did not embarrass the couple. Their connection lasted for a week while Nicholas was vacationing at the hotel, and after his departure, they continued to communicate by phone and correspond on the internet. A few months later, Christina came to Hellberg in Sweden and literally asked to stay at his house. Even then, such behavior seemed too intrusive and tactless to Nicholas. When Christina offered him a weekend trip to the mountains, he refused and sincerely hoped it would be the last time they met. But Christina continued to call, write, and insist on a new meeting. In January 2007, during a phone conversation, Nicholas told Christina that everything was over between them and they should not meet again. But Christina pretended not to hear it. She continued to call, asking to visit him and inviting him to go on vacation with her. In the spring of 2007, Christina returned to Sweden and began to stalk her former boyfriend, Nicholas. She tried to persuade him to resume their relationship, even though he honestly admitted that he was already dating someone else. Christina claimed she had left some of her belongings at his house during her previous visit and needed to retrieve them. Nicholas agreed, but as soon as they entered his home, she attempted to seduce him. When he firmly refused, she ominously said he would regret it. 3 months later, Christina returned again, apologized for her previous behavior, and once more tried to convince Nicholas to reconcile. He rejected her, and later that evening, she called him, claiming she had swallowed pills because she couldn't live without him. Alarmed, Nicholas called an ambulance and also contacted her family, advising them to seek psychiatric help for Christina. After receiving care at the hospital, her mother took her to a psychiatric facility, where she stayed for over a month. However, the treatment had little effect, and Christina remained obsessed with Nicholas, constantly thinking about how to win him back and devising new reasons to meet him. In October 2007, Christina decided to move to Sweden and settled in the suburbs of Stockholm, sharing an apartment with another girl. She resumed her pursuit of Nicholas, and when she finally managed to meet him, she claimed she had given birth to a son by him, but had given the child to a foster family. Nicholas was shocked by this news and was curious about the timing. The last time they had been intimate was over a year ago, and they had met 3 more times since then without any signs of pregnancy. Christina responded evasively and kept adding new details each time. In January 2008, after numerous unsuccessful attempts to meet with Nicholas, Christina wrote him a message stating that their son had been diagnosed with a hereditary disease, and they needed to go to Germany together to see him. She added that the child's adoptive father would contact him with the details. At this time, Nicholas and Emma were in the process of moving to a new home, and Emma knew the whole story. She believed Christina was trying to lure Nicholas to Germany and that no son existed. When Nicholas received a call from a man claiming to be the adoptive father, he asked questions about the child's birth details. The caller became irritated, avoided answering, and eventually hung up. This confirmed Nicholas's suspicion that Christina had fabricated the story and enlisted someone to play along. Upon learning this convoluted story, detectives quickly located Christina's address. Her roommate told them Christina had packed her things the day before and said she was returning to Germany. A check confirmed that Christina had left the country, so the Swedish police sought help from their German counterparts to arrest her. On March 20th, a warrant was issued for her arrest. When Christina was arrested, she claimed there had been a mistake and that she had nothing to do with the crime. However, after being taken to Sweden on March 29th, she requested a meeting with Nicholas, which was denied. She remained calm, but persistently asked to see or call him again. Christina's rented apartment was thoroughly searched, and her phone and laptop were seized for inspection. Investigators examined all her clothes but found no traces of blood. By then, they had determined which of the bloody shoe prints at the crime scene did not belong to the medics or family members. The prints were from athletic shoes, and the tread pattern indicated the brand and style. The shoe size matched the suspects, though Christina claimed she had never owned such a model. Her roommate, however, identified the shoes as belonging to Christina. More disturbing evidence was found on Christina's laptop. It contained numerous photos of Nicholas, both alone and with his new girlfriend. In a separate folder with a disturbing label, there were pictures of Emma and her children, which Christina had copied from Emma's social media page. Each photo was captioned with insulting, threatening, and frightening remarks. The search history revealed queries on how to commit murder without leaving traces, how to hide evidence, and how to divert suspicion. Investigators also found a floor plan of Emma and Nicholas's new home, and notes detailing Nicholas's work schedule and the family's daily routines. Emma's condition eventually stabilized, with her vital signs showing gradual improvement. By the end of March, doctors decided it was time to begin waking her from the medically induced coma. When she awoke, she was still unable to speak due to the breathing tube, but recognized her family members in the room. However, she appeared confused about her situation and why she was in the hospital. Once Emma was able to speak clearly, the police interviewed her, but initially withheld the news about her children's deaths. Emma had no memory of the tragic events and believed she'd been in a car accident. She repeatedly asked about her children, eager to know if they were okay. At first, she received vague responses, but eventually her family and medical team decided to tell her the truth. When informed about her children's murders, Emma became hysterical and had to be sedated. When she woke up, she didn't recall the conversation and again asked about her children. This cycle of being informed and then forgetting continued for several weeks, with Emma's mind repeatedly rejecting the harsh reality. A month later, Emma was taken to the scene of the crime, accompanied by medical personnel. Once inside the house, her memory suddenly returned. She recounted how she had been texting with her sister, setting the table while her children played nearby, when there was a knock on the door. She opened it to see a short, dark figure of a woman. As she asked what the woman wanted, she felt a sharp pain and blacked out. The figure then entered the house and Emma, with her last bit of strength, tried to stop her to protect her children, but collapsed in the hallway, where she was attacked again. Christina continued to deny her involvement in the crime. The murder weapon was never found, and most of the evidence was circumstantial, giving her a chance to avoid conviction. However, Christina's roommate revealed that a hammer had gone missing from her toolkit around the time of the crime. The investigation determined that the size and configuration of that brand of tool matched the suspected murder weapon, though this was also circumstantial. Surveillance footage from a suburban bus station showed Christina visiting the area 3 times in the week before the murders. Christina couldn't explain her frequent visits, and she also couldn't explain her internet searches on how to cover up a crime, or her collection of photos of Emma and her children. The trial began on July 29, 2008, with Christina facing charges of double murder with particular cruelty and attempted murder. Her behavior in the courtroom was strange. She smiled and waved at the audience and laughed when shown gruesome footage of the crime scene. This led some to question her sanity, but a psychiatric evaluation confirmed she was sane and fully aware of her actions. Emma testified during the trial and fainted upon seeing Christina. After regaining consciousness, she recalled everything and identified Christina as the last person she saw before losing consciousness on the day of the crime. Despite efforts by the defense to prove Christina's innocence, the jury unanimously found her guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole and ordered to pay $20,000 in compensation to Emma. No evidence was found that Christina had ever been pregnant or had a child with Nicholas. As for Emma, her recovery was long and difficult, but Nicholas stayed by her side. They married in the summer of 2010 and are now raising 2 children together, who are aware of the tragic fate of their older siblings. Story 5. Jessica Wongso was born in 1988 in Jakarta, Indonesia, into an exceptionally wealthy family. The youngest of 3 children, she was raised by her parents, Imelda and Winardi Wongso, in an environment of extreme luxury. Her family owned a major company specializing in plastic imports, making them one of the largest plastic distributors in Indonesia. Her father was even nicknamed the Plastic King. In a country where most people live on an average income of around $4 a day, Jessica belonged to the privileged few. She always had more than she needed and never lacked for anything. In 2005, Jessica's parents moved to Sydney, Australia, as it was a key market for their business. They purchased a beautiful home in Double Bay, one of Sydney's most exclusive residential areas, where even a small plot of land could cost millions. For more space, Jessica's father bought 2 adjacent plots. However, for reasons unknown, Jessica did not move to Australia with her parents and siblings. She stayed behind in Jakarta to complete her high school education, surrounded by a staff of servants who took care of her every need. From a young age, Jessica was passionate about video games and showed a natural talent for painting, often spending hours absorbed in drawing. This passion eventually led her to pursue a degree in graphic design. After graduating from high school in 2007, Jessica moved to Sydney to live with her family and enrolled at the Billy Blue College of Design. Although her siblings were also in Australia, they led separate lives and Jessica rarely saw them. As she started her university life, she made many friends. Her college friends described Jessica as a lively, silly girl who always entertained those around her with her humor and energy. It was during this time that Jessica met Myrna Salihin, another Indonesian student at the university. Like Jessica, Myrna also came from a wealthy family in Jakarta. Her father, Eddie Salihin, was a successful businessman. Myrna had a twin sister named Sandy and a long-term boyfriend, Aryav, who was studying in Melbourne while Myrna was in Sydney. Jessica and Myrna quickly became close friends, bonding over their shared backgrounds, love for design, and strong personalities. However, they also had their differences. While Jessica was outspoken and loved being the center of attention at every gathering, Myrna was shy, modest, and preferred a simpler, more low-key life. Moreover, unlike Jessica, Myrna's family was warm and close-knit. The university years were some of the most memorable for everyone. Jessica and Myrna often went out with 2 other classmates, Hani and Vera, who were also international students from wealthy families in Jakarta. Time passed, and eventually graduation day arrived. After graduation, Myrna returned to Jakarta with her boyfriend, while Jessica chose to stay in Australia with her family. In June 2015, Myrna visited Sydney for a holiday. She planned to meet her university friends and spend some time exploring the beautiful harbor city. Reconnecting with Jessica, they arranged to have dinner together. For years had passed since their graduation, and they had each gone their separate ways. While Myrna enjoyed a fulfilling life with her fiancé, they were newly engaged and planning their dream wedding. Jessica's life was less smooth. She was working in New South Wales and had a long-term boyfriend named Patrick, but their relationship was troubled by frequent arguments. Jessica confided that Patrick used prohibited substances and was prone to violence. She seemed to be struggling with mental health issues, becoming increasingly depressed and negative. The cheerful, lively Jessica from university was no longer there, and Myrna grew concerned for her friend. Being straightforward by nature, Myrna advised Jessica to break up with Patrick. It was clear from Jessica's stories that Patrick was not good for her and was having a detrimental effect on her well-being. However, Myrna could never have anticipated Jessica's reaction. Jessica became silent, offering no response to Myrna's advice. When Myrna finished speaking, Jessica abruptly stood up from the dining table and left the restaurant without saying goodbye. That day, Myrna learned a valuable lesson. Never advise someone on whether to marry or divorce. The friendship between Myrna and Jessica, already strained since graduation, now seemed beyond repair. Myrna told Arif that she would only meet Jessica if other friends were present. Myrna felt uneasy about seeing Jessica alone, but Arif reassured her not to overthink it. After all, Jessica was in Sydney and they were in Jakarta. They no longer had many mutual friends and life had moved on. In November 2015, just 5 months after the awkward encounter with Jessica, Myrna and Arif celebrated their fairy tale wedding in Bali. The ceremony was beautiful, filled with friends and family, but notably, Jessica was not among the guests. Myrna, admired for her beauty, intelligence, and wealth, seemed to have it all. A loving husband and a life that appeared picture-perfect. Meanwhile, across the ocean, Jessica's life was unraveling. In August 2015, she crashed her Audi A3 into a nursing home at 2 a.m. while intoxicated. The car plowed through a brick wall, stopping just inches from the elderly residents' sleeping quarters. Thankfully, no one was injured, but the accident caused chaos and woke everyone in the home. Jessica sustained only minor injuries, but her car was heavily damaged. This wasn't the first time in 2015 that Jessica had found herself in an ambulance. Over the course of the year, she had been hospitalized 5 times, struggling with a deep desire to end her life. Police and emergency services were frequent visitors to Jessica's home, often arriving just in time to prevent another tragedy. But by November, her boyfriend Patrick had reached his limit. He sought a restraining order to keep Jessica away, exhausted by her relentless harassment, thousands of threatening messages, including promises to kill them both if he left her. Jessica also harassed Patrick's friends and family, leaving them all deeply concerned for their safety. Jessica's life continued to spiral as she drowned herself in alcohol and engaged in increasingly reckless behavior, which eventually cost her her job. Furious and feeling like she had nothing left, Jessica began to lash out. She sent threatening messages to her former manager, detailing how she could kill both the manager and the manager's mother. With her life in Sydney in ruins, no job, no relationship, and no stability, Jessica decided to return to Jakarta. To those around her, it seemed like she wanted to start fresh, but her decision was driven by something far darker. In early December 2015, Jessica created a WhatsApp group with Hani and Myrna, 2 of her old university friends. Hani was also living in Jakarta. Although Myrna was still upset and hadn't spoken to Jessica since their last encounter, Jessica's return to Jakarta set events in motion that no one could have anticipated. Myrna didn't respond to Jessica's right away. However, after Jessica's persistent pleas and with Hani's involvement, Myrna reluctantly agreed to meet. Jessica eagerly messaged the group, saying she would take care of the reservations and treat them to drinks. She even asked what everyone wanted to order. Myrna mentioned she liked Vietnamese iced coffee but said she would order it herself when she arrived. They planned to meet at 5 p.m. on Wednesday, January 6, 2016 at Oliver Coffee, a luxurious cafe in the Grand Indonesia Shopping Center. On the day of the meeting, Jessica arrived at 3:30 p.m., a full 90 minutes early. She spent some time wandering around, seemingly taking in her surroundings. In reality, Jessica was carefully observing the placement of the cafe's cameras. Eventually, she chose table number 54, a secluded spot by the wall out of direct view. By 4:15 p.m., Jessica returned with 3 shopping bags from the body shop. She mentioned she had bought 3 bars of soap as gifts for her friends. Placing the bags on the table, Jessica subtly adjusted them to block the camera's view. Soon after, she approached the bar and ordered 3 drinks, 2 cocktails, and 1 Vietnamese iced coffee, paying for them in advance. When the server brought the drinks, Jessica ensured they were placed behind the shopping bags. After the server left, Jessica shifted her seat. Although the camera footage was blurry, her hand movements were noticeable. It appeared she was adding something to the coffee. Once she was done, Jessica stashed the bags behind her chair and returned to her seat. Myrna and Hani arrived at the cafe at 5:15 p.m., 15 minutes later than planned. By that time, their drinks had been sitting on the table for over 45 minutes. Jessica stood up to greet them as they approached. Myrna's body language indicated discomfort and awkwardness around Jessica. As they sat down, Myrna between Jessica and Hani, Jessica quickly urged Myrna to try the coffee. Unaware of what was to come, Myrna took a sip. Almost immediately, she knew something was wrong. She waved her hands frantically, telling Hani that the coffee tasted terrible. Though she barely touched the drink, that single sip was enough to seal Myrna's fate. Less than a minute later, Myrna's head snapped back in what would be her final movement. She began to vomit, foam at the mouth, and convulse before collapsing to the ground, all within minutes. Chaos ensued. Servers and the manager quickly came over to help while Hani desperately tried to wake Myrna, who was completely unconscious. The manager told the staff to call an ambulance and bring oxygen tanks. As other customers watched in shock, Hani screamed and cried uncontrollably. Only Jessica stayed eerily calm and emotionless. Later, the restaurant manager told the police that she first thought Myrna was having an epileptic seizure, but Jessica immediately glared at her and accused, "What did you guys put in the coffee?" The manager, confused and offended, wondered why Jessica would blame them for tampering with the drink. Jessica's accusation made the manager suspicious, so she told the staff to seal the coffee cup as evidence. If Jessica hadn't spoken up, this key piece of evidence might have been thrown away. Meanwhile, Hani called Arif, telling him that Myrna was having a seizure and foaming at the mouth. Arif was filled with panic and rushed to the hospital, but by the time he arrived, Myrna had passed away. The doctors did everything they could, but it was too late. Arif was heartbroken. Just 2 months after their wedding, his future with Myrna was gone. Myrna Salahin died at 6:30 p.m. on Wednesday, January 6, 2016. Her family and friends were in shock, struggling to understand how a healthy young woman could suddenly die. Just 2 months earlier, they had celebrated her wedding, and now they were gathered around her coffin in grief. The suddenness of her death, along with the strange circumstances, immediately raised suspicions. At the funeral, Jessica's strange behavior stood out. She seemed irritated and didn't shed a single tear, which made people wonder even more. Why had she insisted that Myrna drink the coffee? Why had she ordered it 45 minutes before they arrived? Why choose a table hidden from one camera's view and blocked by the shopping bags from another? Sadly, everything happened so quickly that no one thought to search Jessica that day. Security footage showed that while everyone else was panicking and trying to help Myrna, Jessica stood off to the side, looking around and scratching her thigh. Experts later guessed that the itching on Jessica's hand might have been caused by contact with cyanide. When asked to hand over her trousers for testing, Jessica claimed she had thrown them away because Myrna had vomited on them. But in reality, Jessica never went near Myrna after the poisoning. She just stood back, showing no emotion, and did nothing to help. It's hard to believe that a friend, a young woman like Jessica, could be capable of such a terrible act. But her cold, distant behavior and suspicious actions left many wondering what she was really capable of. The manager handed Myrna's coffee to the police for investigation. 3 days later, the test results came back. The police confirmed that the coffee contained a deadly amount of cyanide. In Indonesia, where most people are Muslim, religious beliefs often discourage autopsies. In criminal cases, the police need the family's permission to perform one. At first, Myrna's family was hesitant to allow the autopsy because they didn't want her body to be disturbed. However, the investigators worked hard to convince the family, promising that the procedure would be done with great care. Eventually, the family agreed to let the police take some samples, but they did not allow a full autopsy. On the evening of Saturday, January 9th, 3 days after Myrna's death, the autopsy was conducted, and the findings were completed by the next morning. The results showed that Myrna's stomach had bled and contained a small amount of cyanide. However, the toxicology tests found no cyanide in other parts of her body. Thanks to the manager's smart decision to have the staff seal the coffee cup, the police had solid evidence. The murder weapon was a coffee cup laced with cyanide. The question then arose, how did Jessica get cyanide? Acquiring cyanide legally is difficult, but many believe that Jessica, being smart, might have bought it on the black market. However, the police found no evidence that Jessica had ever obtained cyanide. The case shook the entire nation of Indonesia, drawing massive public interest and media attention. People followed the case closely, discussing it as if it were a crime thriller. From that point on, many rumors began to spread. After security camera footage quickly circulated on social media, most people suspected Jessica. But the big question remained, why? What was her motive? Some speculated that Jessica had unrequited feelings for Myrna and decided to seek revenge after learning that Myrna had married Ariev. Others suggested Jessica acted out of anger because she wasn't invited to the wedding and felt left out as Myrna became closer to Hani and Vera. Ariev, Myrna's husband, thought that Jessica was upset because Myrna had advised her to break up with her boyfriend. Meanwhile, Sandy, Myrna's sister, believed that Jessica killed Myrna out of jealousy. She envied everything Myrna had that she didn't. Not just wealth, but also a loving husband, a happy family, and close friends in Jakarta. However, all of these were just speculations. The true motive behind Jessica's actions might only be known to her. Indonesian police contacted the Australian authorities to access Jessica's criminal record while she lived in Australia. Since Australia has laws against the death penalty, the police agreed to share the files on the condition that Jessica would not face the death penalty if found guilty. The Indonesian authorities agreed, and it turned out that Jessica's record in Australia was far from clean. She was mentioned in 13 police reports for offenses like threatening others, driving under the influence, and even having her ex-boyfriend file a restraining order against her. On June 15, 2016, 6 months after Myrna's death, the trial of the century began at the Central Jakarta Court. Jessica showed no signs of guilt or sadness. In fact, she was quite the opposite. If you only looked at the footage, you might think she had just won a jackpot rather than being on trial for murder. Jessica appeared glowing, smiling throughout the session, and even waved proudly at the press. It was clear she enjoyed being in the spotlight. During the trial, she kept a calm demeanor, often smiling at the judge and looking confident that she would be acquitted. Her wealthy family hired over 15 of Indonesia's top lawyers to defend her. The defense argued that no cyanide was found in Myrna's liver, lungs, or urine. Only a small amount was detected in her stomach, which they suggested could have been naturally produced after death. They also claimed that a full autopsy was needed to determine the exact cause of death, while the examiners had only studied tissue and fluid samples. Jessica's lawyers even suggested Myrna's death could have been from an undiagnosed illness. The police, however, never proved that Jessica possessed cyanide. On October 5, 2016, the packed courtroom and the entire nation held their breath as the final verdict was read. Jessica was ultimately found guilty and sentenced to 20 years in prison. The courtroom erupted in applause and sighs of relief. Due to an agreement with Australian authorities, Jessica avoided the death penalty by firing squad. For many Indonesians watching the lives of the ultra-wealthy like Jessica and Myrna, this case highlighted that even the rich face their own troubles and unhappiness. Afterward, Vietnamese iced coffee became a popular drink in cafes across the city, though it carried a dark association that no one really wanted to talk about. Thanks for watching. If you found this story intriguing, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more true crime content. Let us know your thoughts on this case in the comments below. Do you think justice was served? Story 6. Rick and Susan seem to have it all: a big house in a peaceful neighborhood, 2 lovely kids, good jobs, and financial security. But hidden within the Wemsley household were dark secrets. Things took a turn when the police received an unusual 911 call just before Christmas. When officers arrived at the quiet town of Mansfield, Texas, they found the garage doors open and the side door unlocked. Inside, they discovered a tragic scene. Rick Wemsley, a well-liked local accountant, and his cheerful wife Susie were found dead. It seemed the crime had happened well before the emergency call was made. Rick and Susie knew each other from high school in Oklahoma in the 1970s, though they weren't close back then. Years later, they reconnected while Rick was at Oklahoma State University and Susie was at a Christian college. Their relationship grew, and they decided to get married, start a family, and grow old together. They tied the knot and welcomed their daughter Sarah in 1978, followed by their son Andrew 6 years later. Rick became a certified accountant and worked in the oil and gas industry. The family moved several times due to his career opportunities, eventually settling in Fort Worth, Texas, near the Trinity River. Fort Worth is a large but cozy city with a rich history. There, Rick set up his own accounting practice from home, which provided a good income. By 2003, the Wemsleys lived in an upscale neighborhood in Mansville, about 20 miles from Fort Worth. Sarah, now 25, had become a mother and lived on her own, while 19-year-old Andrew had just finished high school and was attending college while working part-time at a mini golf course. Rick and Susie had a happy marriage and celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary in July 2003 with friends and family. In December of that year, Rick and Susan wanted to have a special family celebration for their 25th Christmas together. Susie put a lot of effort into making the day perfect. She spent hours picking out decorations and gifts, and she adorned their home inside and out with festive garlands and Christmas figurines. A large Christmas tree, covered in bright lights and colorful ornaments, stood in the living room, with presents wrapped and placed underneath. Susie wrapped each gift with love, imagining how happy her family would be when they opened them. This cozy holiday scene took a dark turn when, on December 11, 2003, at 11:41 p.m., the Mansville emergency dispatcher received a call from the Wemsley home. There was only silence on the other end, suggesting that someone needed help but couldn't speak. The dispatcher quickly sent a patrol car to the house. Upon arrival, the police officers circled the house, peering through the windows. They got no response from knocking or ringing the doorbell, but they found the side door to the garage open. The officers entered the home, walking through the kitchen, where they noticed the landline phone off the hook and lying on the table. In the living room, they found 45-year-old Susie Wemsley lying cold on the couch. In the foyer near the front door, they discovered 46-year-old Rick Wemsley in a pool of blood. Sadly, it was clear that both were beyond help. At 12:17 a.m., paramedics arrived and confirmed that Rick and Susie were dead. The house was immediately sealed off, and an investigation began. The autopsy revealed that Susie had died from a gunshot wound and had also been stabbed 7 times, likely after she had already passed away. It's believed she was attacked while she was dozing on the couch in the living room. Detectives discovered 2 bloody palm prints that might have been left by the perpetrator, as well as a bullet, 2 pieces of a blue plastic hair clip, and another piece of plastic on the floor nearby. Rick Wemsley met the same tragic end as his wife, but possibly not as quickly. Bullet holes in the headboard of the bed in the master bedroom suggested that the attack on Rick began there before moving to the hallway. There was no blood in the bedroom, leading investigators to believe that Rick woke up from the gunshots and either fled the room or confronted the intruder himself. It appeared that Rick wasn't willing to go down without a fight, as evidenced by a tuft of hair found in his left hand, indicating a struggle. This hair became crucial evidence. Rick was also shot and suffered approximately 11 knife wounds to his back. The detectives carefully combed through every room in the house, examining all carpets and furniture for clues. The hair found in Rick's hand and the broken hair clip on the living room floor were sent for DNA analysis. The Wemsley spacious home was thoroughly checked for fingerprints, and investigators searched each room for signs of robbery. Initially, they considered the possibility that the family had interrupted a burglary, causing the intruders to resort to violence. However, the excessive number of stab wounds suggested otherwise. This theory was further dismissed when nearly $115,000 in cash was discovered in the master bedroom. A thief would have easily found and taken this money, but since it remained untouched in the bedside table, robbery was ruled out as a motive. It was later confirmed that no valuables were missing from the house, and there were no signs of forced entry. Neighbors and friends were horrified by the shocking news. They couldn't fathom who would commit such a heinous act against Rick and Susie, who were beloved in the community. Couldn't believe it. You just don't think of that happening close by. The couple often hosted guests in their home, and were known for their kindness and willingness to help others. The sudden, brutal crime in this quiet neighborhood, especially just before the holidays, left everyone feeling anxious and fearful. Rick and Susie Wemsley appeared to have an ideal life. They lived in a spacious house, where Rick thrived as an accountant. He also enjoyed gardening and taking his son to Texas Rangers baseball games. Susie was a dedicated homemaker who kept the household running smoothly and cared deeply for their children. In her free time, she loved spending quality moments with her son and daughter. However, what occurred behind closed doors turned out to be far more troubling than the serene life they seemed to lead. According to some sources, there were more layers to this seemingly perfect family. There was always tension inside the Wemsley house, particularly concerning their two children, Sarah and Andrew. As a teenager, Sarah was kicked out of the house for misbehavior, leading her to become pregnant at 19 and enter into an unhealthy relationship with her daughter's father, Todd Cleveland. Sarah often argued with her younger brother, Andrew. The two siblings never felt much affection for each other. According to Sarah's ex-boyfriend, the Wemsley family was always wary of outsiders, even their friends, suspecting that people were only pretending to be close to them to gain something. This mistrust extended to their own family, contributing to an underlying unhappiness despite their growing prosperity. Reports suggested that Rick and Susie's marriage was unstable, although they tried to maintain appearances in public. The Wemsleys had an agreement with their children if they enrolled in college and stayed in school. They would receive financial support. This arrangement didn't work out with Sarah, but Andrew convinced his parents that he was committed to honoring his part of the deal. As a result, Susie and Rick gifted him a new white Mustang, paid for his insurance, and provided money for other expenses. Andrew continued living at home without contributing to the household budget, and everything seemed fine except that he didn't keep up his end of the bargain. Like his sister, Andrew dropped out of college without completing his education. When his parents eventually discovered that he had left school, they stopped supporting him financially. However, they didn't go as far as to kick him out of the house. Despite the ongoing tension, Andrew, now 19, chose to spend most of his free time hanging out with friends at the local Pancake House. A restaurant specializing in breakfasts, the Pancake House was where Andrew's friend introduced him to his sister, 19-year-old Chelsea Richardson. Sarah Wemsley was informed of her parents' deaths at 4 a.m., soon after their bodies were discovered. However, the police couldn't locate the younger son, Andrew. The authorities had already appealed to the media, asking for any sightings of Andrew's white Mustang. While forensic experts continued their work at the crime scene, a white Mustang arrived at the Wemsley house. Andrew and his girlfriend, Chelsea Richardson, stepped out of the car. They had been staying at Chelsea's place for several days. That morning, they learned about the tragic events at the Wemsley home while watching the news. The police immediately asked Andrew and Chelsea to follow a service vehicle to the station for questioning. Andrew's interview lasted about 45 minutes. He revealed that he hadn't been home or communicated with his parents for several days, as he had been living with Chelsea. The police noted fresh scratches on Andrew's hand, adding to the investigation's interest. There was nothing suspicious in Andrew's story, so the police allowed him to leave the station. However, they requested that he sign a consent form permitting them to search his car. During a conversation with his sister after the interrogation, Andrew mentioned that forensic experts might find their mother's blood in the Mustang. He explained that their mother had recently cut her finger and, for some reason, had taken his car to drive to the store, which could explain any potential blood traces. Chelsea Richardson's statement at the police station matched Andrew's perfectly. She confirmed they had been together for the past 2 days and had been inseparable since they began dating the previous fall. They often spent entire nights in a 24-hour cafe playing Master Duel, a Japanese collectible card game where players use cards to battle each other, simulating battles between fantastic monsters. The game's central character was described as a weak, infantile boy who became a hero when he played. This shared interest deeply bonded Andrew and Chelsea, and they had started thinking seriously about marriage. Chelsea's mother supported their relationship and was fond of Andrew. However, Rick and Susie Wemsley were openly disappointed with Andrew's choice of partner. They had hoped for a different kind of girl for their son. The Richardsons lived on the outskirts of Fort Worth, in a working-class area known as the Blue Collar District, which was a stark contrast to the upscale neighborhood of Mansfield, where the Wemsleys lived. A few years earlier, Chelsea had lost her beloved father to a heart attack, and her mother sometimes worked 3 jobs to make ends meet. Despite their financial struggles, the Richardsons were known for their generosity. Chelsea, an extroverted and cheerful person, was quite popular at her school. Her lively and happy disposition earned her the nickname Bubbles. Chelsea Richardson's best friend, Susanna Padana, sometimes benefited from Chelsea's generosity. When Susanna had disputes with her own mother, she was warmly welcomed into the Richardson home, where she stayed for several months. The 3 teenagers Andrew, Chelsea, and Susanna were together on the night of Andrew's parents' deaths. Chelsea's ex-boyfriend, Jeremy Lavender, confirmed their alibi, stating that they were at his house the entire time. Sarah Wemsley informed the police that her daughter's father, Todd Cleveland, might be involved in her parents' deaths. They had been arguing about custody, and Sarah had recently threatened to call Child Protective Services on him. A day after this threat, and about a month before the tragedy, another suspicious incident occurred. In an early November, while returning home with her parents after a horseback riding lesson, Sarah experienced a frightening event. As they drove through a neighboring town looking for a place to eat, her father's Jeep suddenly jolted. Rick thought they might have hit a large stone, but upon inspection, they found a bullet hole in the rear of the vehicle. Frightened and confused, Susie made 2 phone calls. Oddly, her first call was to her son Andrew, not the police. She believed that a white Mustang had been following them from the ranch, assuming it was Andrew's car. However, this assumption changed after the Jeep was shot at. Susie's second call was to the police, and she filed a report about the incident. Sarah recalled suspecting Todd Cleveland at the time, but now she questioned why her mother had called Andrew first. It turned out that both Sarah and Andrew stood to inherit a $1 million insurance policy from their father. Additionally, the family home was valued at about $1,650,000, and there was around $100,000 in cash plus other assets left by Rick and Susie. Investigators considered Sarah's suspicions and eventually ruled out her former partner, Todd, as a suspect. Given the financial benefits and family tensions, the investigators continued to focus on the Wemsley children. However, DNA analysis and fingerprinting did not match any family members, indicating no direct connection to the crime scene for either Rick and Susie's son or daughter. Despite the lack of physical evidence, Sarah filed a petition to block Andrew from inheriting any family assets. She believed he was responsible for their parents' deaths and feared for her own safety. Although forensic examination of Andrew's car confirmed the presence of blood on the back seat and headrests, the Mustang had been thoroughly washed, making it impossible for experts to collect a viable DNA sample. Law enforcement couldn't even determine whose blood it was. Several months after Rick and Susie's tragic deaths, the investigation hit a dead end. The district attorney needed more information, so the police department convened a grand jury and began issuing subpoenas to those connected to the deceased couple. They started by verifying the alibis of the son and daughter. Jeremy Lavender, Chelsea's ex-boyfriend, testified under oath that Andrew and his friends were with him that night, providing a solid alibi. Chelsea's best friend Susanna corroborated this, and after giving her testimony, she voluntarily provided a DNA sample to compare with evidence from the crime scene. No one expected this moment would become a turning point in the investigation. Susanna Tadano had moved to Texas from Illinois a few years earlier. She didn't fit in well with her new classmates. She wasn't particularly diligent, smart, or charismatic. Susanna frequently skipped classes and argued with her mother. Chelsea Richardson became Susanna's lifeline, and the two grew so close that Chelsea wrote a note in the school yearbook celebrating their strong friendship and even composed a poem titled Friends Forever. When investigators compared Susanna Tadano's DNA with the strand of hair found in Rick's hand and DNA from the broken hair clip at the crime scene, they found a match. This revelation indicated there was much more to the story. Susanna was arrested on suspicion of killing the Wemsley couple and faced the possibility of the death penalty. Realizing the severity of her situation, Susanna began to talk. Initially, Susanna claimed that on the night of the crime, she was walking with a friend, a 25-year-old man named Hilario Cardes. She said Hilario had a gun and needed money. According to her story, Hilario entered the Wemsley house alone in the middle of the night while she stayed outside. When she heard gunshots, she ran into the house, where Rick Wemsley allegedly begged her to stop the attack. Susanna claimed she couldn't intervene because she wasn't really involved. Her hair was left in the house during the chaos. But who was Hilario Cardes? It turned out he worked as a night manager at a local restaurant where the friends frequently spent their leisure time. Hilario had a young daughter and was in desperate need of money. He learned about the Wemsley families through Andrew Wemsley, whom he had met and befriended. During questioning, Hilario denied any involvement in the attack, but admitted to acquiring a gun for $200 at Andrew Wemsley's request. Andrew, Chelsea, and Susanna had planned to practice target shooting with an acquaintance. Armed investigators sought to verify Hilario's story, starting with the owners of the property where the teenagers supposedly practiced shooting. The property owner, a friend of Chelsea's mother, confirmed that a few months before the tragedy, Andrew, Chelsea, and Susanna came to her approximately 3-acre plot to practice shooting at a small pond. However, she had never seen or heard of Hilario Cardes. Hilario further gained the police's trust by passing a lie detector test. The pond on the farm property was drained, and forensic experts collected bullets from the bottom. They matched the bullets fired in the Wemsley house, confirming that the three teenagers had indeed been practicing their marksmanship for several months, preparing for the crime. This evidence discredited Susanna's initial story accusing Hilario of attacking the Wemsley couple. She was given another opportunity to tell the truth, and this time she directly implicated her best friend in a more detailed account. According to Susanna's new version, the three teenagers spent nights at a local cafe plotting their sinister plans. They calculated that after Rick and Susie's deaths, Andrew would inherit over $1 million, a sum that would set them up for life. The friends envisioned living together, with Susanna quitting her hated low-paying job and buying a new car. They convinced Hilario to purchase a gun for them. After target practice on the farm, the group concluded that Susanna was the most accurate shooter among them. Their first plan involved shooting at Rick's Jeep's gas tank. If successful, this would have caused an explosion, potentially killing Rick and his family. However, the plan did not go as intended. The plan to eliminate the Wemsley family for financial gains started with an attempt to shoot at Rick's Jeep's gas tank. When that failed, the teenagers Andrew, Chelsea, and Susanna decided to break into the Wemsley house, intending to stage it as a robbery. Chelsea's frustration with Susanna led her to pressure Susanna into following through with the plan. Susanna, armed with a gun, was hidden in Andrew's bedroom closet. After several hours of decision, she and the others proceeded with their plan early on December 11, 2003. Susanna shot Susie on the couch, then attempted to shoot Rick in the master bedroom, missing and waking him up. A struggle ensued, and Andrew took the gun from Susanna, delivering fatal shots to his father. Chelsea and Andrew then inflicted additional wounds on Rick before fleeing. Susanna's testimony, though initially inconsistent, became the cornerstone of the case against her friends. She confessed to her involvement and implicated Chelsea and Andrew in the crime. The investigation and subsequent trial revealed a complex web of deceit, manipulation, and betrayal among the teenagers. Chelsea Richardson, once seen as the mastermind, was convicted and sentenced to death. Her sentence was later commuted to life imprisonment after her defense argued that her best friend, Susanna, was the primary instigator. Andrew received a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 2044, while Hilario Cardes, involved in the conspiracy but not the attack, was sentenced to 50 years. Susanna Tadano, who provided crucial testimony, was also convicted and will be eligible for parole in 2034. The tragic story highlights how ambition and envy can drive individuals to commit heinous acts. As the rain falls and the night deepens, thank you for being here with me at Radio Night Crime. True crime stories remind us of life's mysteries and the need to stay aware, even in the stillness of the night. If you enjoyed tonight's story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let the sound of the rain lull you to sleep, and until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and let the night keep you company.